Guys, this is the Benchmade 610 Rukus full-size version. This is a grail knife that I've been after for probably the last 5 years or so, and I got it about a month ago on eBay. Finally found a good price. These usually command fairly high prices from the Benchmade collectors community, and this one was pretty reasonable. I've seen them go all the way up to probably, I think, 600 is the highest. And to me, that's just an absurd price. I would never pay that. But this one was reasonable. Snagged it, and I'm very happy I did. It is a pretty large folder, as folders go. It's a 4.25-inch blade, 0.15-inch thick. It actually tapers down quite nicely to about, I would say, probably 20 thou behind the edge, which is quite good for knives in this class. This is a similar thickness to the Adamas, vastly better cutter. Also, it came with a pretty good edge on it. Benchmade usually is disappointing in that area in my experience, but this one was quite nice. It's definitely been sharpened quite a few times, as you can see right here. I was just doing some cardboard cutting. This is probably the 7th run of cutting I've done with this knife. And the blade is S30V. I have to say, I'm quite impressed with this particular example of S30V. This is probably one of the better exhibitions of S30V I've seen. It cuts very well. It has exactly the type of performance you would expect from a rather high carbide steel, and it just wears smooth on cardboard and things like this. But it's a nice high hardness. This feels definitely like it's about 60. It doesn't feel like any of the other ones I've had that are in the 58, 59 range. On the stone, this steel forms very crisply. Very minimal burr issues, very easy to minimize and get rid of a burr, and just sharpens up like a dream. This is a joy to sharpen. I've already sharpened this after all this cardboard cutting on my fine Smith's diamond stone, and this stone, it may be 10 passes per side. After I had already cut the apex off to remove all that damaged steel, maybe 10 passes per side, and my edge was already completely reformed. Very solid execution of S30V from Benchmade. And surprisingly good fine edge retention. I've done a couple of wood trials with it, and I did a couple of ramming cuts into knots, so it held up just fine. No chipping, just barest hint of a roll after that, but all the other spots that didn't do that type of work, anyone that was just cutting simple wood, this particular steel in this blade held up just fine. It basically ignored the wood, which was a little impressive because S30V being a higher carbide steel, it's really not designed for wood cutting and things like that. It typically loses that super fine, I guess, hair whittling edge, you could call it, rather quickly. But this one kept it. You know, this, I have to say, Benchmade really did do a good job on this blade. As you can see, it's also a rather large handle. Very nice aesthetically, in my opinion. That's one of the things that drew me to this. I've been hunting this knife for probably the last 5 years or so now, and one of the main things that drew me to it was just looks. Not everything has to be about cutting. There's plenty of room for aesthetic appeal in knives, and to me, this one is just a beautiful knife. I found it really cool the way they did this bottom scale, which was removable. This is the natural micarta standard scale, which functionally is my preferred one. But they did numerous ones. They had a carbon fiber. I believe it was either a bloodwood or an ebony wood, or it might have been rosewood. One of those fancy woods. They also had a silver twill G10, which I thought was absolutely stunning. I have no idea where you're going to find that. I doubt I'd find one again. But beautiful. Slight customization capability with this knife, and well machined everything on the knife. Very nice tight tolerances as far as production knives go. Benchmade did a solid job producing this and fitting everything and doing all that jazz. Nice jimping, nice and sharp jimping. This is, in my opinion, the way jimping really should be done. I'm not a huge fan of those really big, chunky jimping, kind of like what ZT will do sometimes. I just find that has virtually no use in actual cutting. It doesn't do anything. This nice, fine jimping actually gives you an indexing point, so it'll help you know where your thumb is, or if you apply force, it will stop your thumb without ripping it open. And as you can see, it's got the double choils. I'm typically not a fan of these finger choil type things on knives because for whatever reason they generally don't fit my hand. These types of things are great if it fits your hand well. If it fits your hand, it's like a glove. It's solid. If it doesn't, it's awful. But I was lucky enough that this knife that I've been after for such a long time had that jimping that actually fit my hand properly. It comes down into a nice little swell, so if you want to choke up on this for snap cuts, if I don't know, maybe use it for gardening or something like that, you can actually do it pretty well. Not too bad. As far as ergonomics, this grip, the saber grip, which is how I cut this type of material, knife is solid in this, no problems. It's quite comfortable. Even the clip, which this type of clip, I have had a few issues with it in the past. Nothing in serious, nothing major, but it's been a slight bit of abrasive issue with some knives, like my Adamas. But in this one, for whatever reason, the way the hand sits, it just that clip fits into that little pocket in my hand, and it just, I don't really feel it too much when this type of light cutting. As far as heavy cutting, you can choke up pretty easily in the hammer grip, which is how I do this. This is what I would do for like wood, like you see over there. It fits quite comfortably. It's the only issues I've had with ergonomics on this knife is that while, as you can see, it's rounded, but it's not very well contoured. There's nothing sharp, but neither is there anything round enough to get rid of the stress that will rise up. So under moderate force, it's really not bad. But when you really start bearing down on the knife like this is where you'll start to get some issues. Again, not the worst knife I've ever handled like this, but it could be improved. Just to give you guys perspective, here's my Benchmade Bedlam. Similar thing, G10, and they did a fantastic job at rounding the shoulders and the scales out so there's no sharp edge to concentrate stress up here. And this handle is simply, in my opinion, the best handle Benchmade's done in this regard. They did a fantastic job. All this little ridges give you nice little grip without being abrasive, and it's not slippery. I think the Bedlam, they did a fantastic job on scale rounding, showing that they can do it. But for whatever reason, they just didn't do it on this. But then again, it's not the biggest issue. I can work around it, I can live with it, because I mean, this isn't a bushcraft folder, and realistically, I'm not cutting, 2,000 cuts worth of, 50+ pound power cuts with this knife anyway. If I'm doing that type of stuff, I'm going to have a fixed blade. But it could potentially be an issue for someone, and it's a little bit of an irritation to me because, as I just showed on that Bedlam, Benchmade is more than capable of doing that type of scale contouring. Uses standoffs in the back to separate everything, no back spacer, which is nice because you can just use like compressed air to blow that out. These scales are not milled out, they're just solid scales. And at first I was somewhat critical of it, but the way they have the second scale set up, they have this little nub that goes into a secondary hole in here that sort of helps cement the scale in there. So it was probably more trouble than it was worth to mill out the scale, and there wouldn't be enough space for it to really matter. You might have saved 2 ounces. And I challenge anyone to really say that 2 ounces makes that serious of a difference in carry. Closed, it's still a large knife. I don't generally have too big of an issue with it in the pocket. I've been carrying it quite a bit just because I really enjoy it. There's a couple of pairs of pants that I have that can barely fit it, but most things it works fine. This is obviously not the knife you want to use if you're wearing some sort of athletic shorts or basketball shorts or sweats or something like that. But if you're wearing regular pants, it works just fine. Obviously, axis lock. This is probably my favorite lock, with the only major competition for me being the compression lock. I've liked the axis lock since the first time I've ever had it. It's worked great for me. I like the ambidexterity. I like the smoothness of the pivot that the axis lock gives you. For me personally, it's easy to use. I've never had any issues with opening or closing it. And oddly, I've also never once had an issue with an Omega spring breaking. I know a lot of people who hate the axis system because they have issues with the Omega spring. I have to have owned probably 20 plus Benchmades at this point, and I have several that I've flipped open thousands and thousands of times. My Adamas has probably been opened at least 10,000 times. I've never come close to breaking an Omega spring. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. It absolutely happens. It's documented. But I've never had an issue with them, and they've always worked flawlessly for me. I've never had a axis lock slip except for one knife where the pivot would back out that I just got recently from a friend. He sent it to me. And that would happen. But assuming everything's to tolerance and everything's right and the pivot's staying where it should, I can't think of a serious practical way you would disengage this lock without forcing it. And it's just very secure lock. I'm not saying it's the strongest, but from a practical standpoint, it's pretty moot about lock strength. All in all, very enjoyable knife for me. I'm really glad I was finally able to get one of these. They're pretty hard to come by. They were discontinued around 2010 or so, and I just have no idea why this is so sought after. I mean, I know it's odd to say since I'm one of the people that really was looking for one, but yeah, it's kind of a hard one to find. They did bring back the Mini in two limited edition versions this year, but I've held the Mini, and for whatever reason, the miniature version just does not sit well in my hand. I was not a fan. This full-size version, it's quite nice and quite comfortable for 90% of what I do with knives. The only thing I really have to knock it is that because of the blade thickness, for any sort of kitchen cutting, which I do quite a bit of with my folders, since I have roommates and my kitchen knives are often hopelessly dull, I find myself very often using one of my folders to cut things in the kitchen. The blade is just too thick. It's just atrocious. Trying to cut potatoes with this thing, it's just really bad. Not fun. But, yeah, anyway, that's my take on the Benchmade Rukus. Really solid knife. I guess if you wanted a rating, I'd probably give it like an 8.5 out of 10, just for a couple of small details that were really looked over when they shouldn't have been. Yeah, if you guys have any questions or comments, please post them down below and I'll get back to them. Thanks.